Okay, so today we're tackling a pretty huge question, one that's been around forever, really. What's the meaning of life?
Yeah, the big one.
Right. We're diving into Terry Eagleton's book, The Meaning of Life. A very short introduction.
A very short introduction to a very big topic.
Exactly. And we're going off the stuff you marked in there, really try and cut through all the noise around this question and find something, well, something interesting.
I think what's really cool is Eagleton doesn't just jump into, giving us answers right away. He actually steps back and says, hold on, what's the meaning of life? Even a real question. Is this something we can even ask?
Okay, so a question that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
How does that work?
He compares it to, what's the taste of geometry?
Okay.
So it sounds like a question. It's grammatically a question, but
The pieces don't fit.
right, the ideas don't make sense together.
Right. And Eagleton points out that philosophers often do this. They look at the question itself.
More than they look for a definite answer.
So it's like they're studying the puzzle box rather than trying to open it.
Exactly.
Okay. And one of the big things here is this idea that meaning might be something that comes from language,
Yeah.
not something that just exists, out there in the world.
Inherent in things.
Right.
A cabbage, for instance, doesn't have meaning
Right.
until we start talking about it. Or using it, in recipes.
Right, giving it some kind of context.
Exactly.
I'm thinking about Wittgenstein here too. Didn't he have some ideas about how language trips us up?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're thinking about these big philosophical concepts.
Totally. He pointed out that a lot of philosophical problems come from, misusing language.
Uh-huh.
Simple example, I have headache,
Okay.
have a book.
Okay, similar, yeah.
Grammatically, they seem the same, but the experience is totally different.
Right.
You can't, lend someone your headache.
Uh-huh.
So Wittgenstein argued that these kind of surface similarities in how we use words can mislead us, especially with big ideas like meaning.
So are we saying the problem with the meaning of life might be the way we're even asking it?
It's possible. We're taking the way we talk about physical things and applying it to something much bigger.
And it's not just meaning that Eagleton looks at, right? He also questions the word life.
Oh, absolutely.
What even is life in this context?
Right. He brings up Nietzsche, who had this idea about nouns,
Okay.
that they can reify things,
Refi.
basically turning actions or qualities into solid objects.
Got it.
So he asks if life as a noun does this.
Okay, so instead of seeing living as a process, something ongoing,
We're tricked into thinking it's one big thing.
with one big meaning.
Yeah.
It has to have one meaning because it's one thing.
It's like asking, okay, this car is fast and this car is blue, so what's the carness of all cars?
Huh.
Maybe that's not how it works with life. Just because parts of life feel meaningful doesn't mean there's this one big life meaning that we can add up.
Okay, but here's what I find interesting. Even if the question itself is, tricky,
Right.
Eagleton says just asking it can be valuable.
Oh, for sure.
A good question, even if it has no easy answer.
Can lead to all sorts of new understanding.
Right, exactly. It makes you think in different ways.
Yeah. Some philosophers even say that reality itself is shaped by the questions we ask about it.
Whoa,
Heavy stuff.
that is heavy. And Marx, he had a more practical take.
Oh, yeah.
He thought we only ask questions that we might actually be able to answer.
So we're asking about the meaning of life.
Maybe there's something there.
Maybe there's something to find.
Okay, now here's a real mind bender. What if not knowing the meaning of life
Okay.
is actually part of what makes it meaningful?
Whoa. Okay.
It sounds crazy, I know, but Eagleton talks about this.
He does.
He brings up Schopenhauer, Freud,
Big thinkers.
who thought that the real truth about life might be too much for us,
Yeah.
that we need illusions to just keep going.
We need those comforting stories.
Right, and this connects to Nietzsche too.
Absolutely. The birth of tragedy.
All right,
He argued that existence is just so overwhelming
yeah,
that we create these comforting illusions, art, religion,
to cope.
to make life bearable.
So we're talking about life as this solid thing,
Right.
but maybe it's actually this fluid, messy experience that we
try to give it shape.
impose some order on it,
Exactly.
because otherwise it's just too much.
Too much to handle.
Okay. And talking about facing difficult truths, Eagleton points to tragedy as this art form that grapples with the meaning of life
Fit on.
head on,
Yeah.
doesn't shy away from, the worst possibilities.
The dark stuff.
And he reminds us that ancient Greek tragedy came from a culture that was like very aware of how fragile life is.
And dangerous.
And dangerous, right? Like logic could only do so much.
A little bit of light in a chaotic world.
It makes me think of that line from Oedipus. Count no man happy until he dies.
Wow.
Right.
Heavy.
Yeah. And before all this modern stuff, the meaning of life was often connected to, well, God.
Right. Very much so.
12th century philosophers saw God as like the foundation of existence.
The ground of being.
But they also said that our existence wasn't something God needed.
Right. It was a gift.
An act of love.
Not a necessity.
And for the ancient Hebrews, as Eagleton writes,
Yeah.
the meaning of life was pretty straightforward. It was
Following Yahweh.
Yahweh. And his law.
His law.
Asking, what's the meaning of life? Back then would have been like,
Asking if they believed in God.
yeah. But not in the way we ask it today.
Right.
Like, it wasn't about intellectually agreeing that God exists.
Yeah.
It was about faith.
A lived experience.
Have a way of life.
A relationship.
Exactly. And this makes me think that, pre-modern societies with their strong religious beliefs and clearly defined social roles.
Maybe they didn't struggle with this question as much as we do.
Right. Like, meaning was found in tradition, in doing what was expected of you.
Belonging to a community.
Right. And the idea of needing to find your own individual meaning,
That came much later.
that was less common.
Yeah. Eagleton compares Odysseus and Homer,
Uh-huh.
whose identity is tied to being a hero, a leader,
Right.
to Hamlet in Shakespeare,
Okay.
who is much more
Introspective.
introspective, questioning,
Yeah.
more modern in that sense.
So then we come to postmodernism, which kind of throws a wrench in everything
It does,
because it questions this whole idea of meaning
right?
in the way we've been talking about it.
It challenges those assumptions.
Thinkers like Deleuze,
Deleuze, yeah,
they reject the idea that things can represent something else.
or have these hidden meanings.
Right. It's like things just are.
They are what they are. No
Yeah.
need to dig deeper.
And this rejection of the surface depth model of meaning,
Uh-huh.
that's important.
It is. Think of allegory,
Okay.
where a story has like this hidden moral message.
Right. A surface story with a deeper meaning.
Exactly. Or modern science, looking for the laws of nature.
Right.
Postmodernism pushes back against this.
So no more foundations.
No more foundations.
Eagleton says culture often takes the place of those absolutes in postmodern thought.
Interesting.
Yeah. And he also makes this point that when people start asking big questions about life's meaning,
Yeah.
on a large scale, it often means that
Sir,
things are unstable,
I'm stuck.
unstuck.
Right.
Like the old ways of thinking aren't working anymore.
Exactly.
But he separates that from the individual asking if their own life is meaningful.
Right. Which is like a personal thing.
Right. It's about, like, do I feel fulfilled?
Do I feel like my life has a purpose?
Right. And it says someone who never asks that might be missing something. Like maybe they're not as happy as they could be.
Self-reflection is important.
Yeah. And the 20th century, with all the violence
Yeah.
and this sense of like human life being devalued,
It was dark time.
people really started grappling with this question of meaning.
It makes sense.
Eagleton suggests it's a direct result of what happened.
Like a response to trauma.
Yeah.
Trying to find meaning in a world that
That seemed to have lost it.
lost it.
And beyond just the sheer number of people who suffered,
Uh-huh.
the modern era saw a shift in what Eagleton calls the symbolic dimension.
Okay.
So things like religion, culture,
The things that give us meaning
even sexuality
became more private.
became more private. They used to be central to public life.
Right.
And this had a huge impact on where people found meaning.
It shifted the whole landscape.
And as these private areas became like substitutes for a shared sense of value,
Uh-huh.
they became overloaded.
Interesting.
So sexuality becomes a huge focus.
Okay.
Art is seen as incredibly important.
Yeah.
Religion becomes very rigid
Right.
or morphs into these new age spiritualities.
Trying to fill the void.
We see celebrities turning to like esoteric beliefs.
As a reaction to materialism.
Right. And at the same time, these private spheres are being invaded by public forces.
In a way.
Like sexuality is used to sell things.
Yeah.
Mass media culture,
It's everywhere.
even religion becoming a business.
That's a tough one.
And all this makes it even harder to find solid meaning.
Even in your personal life.
Yeah. And then Eagleton points to sports.
Okay.
especially football in Britain,
Okay.
as filling the space once occupied by, like, faith and national pride.
Interesting.
Right.
A new source of
It gives people a sense of belonging, ritual,
identity.
shared identity. He even says sport has become the new opiate of the masses.
Whoa.
Right.
Replacing religion.
Yeah, it's providing that kind of...
But structure.
yeah, structure. Meaning. And all this happens as the traditional sources of meaning are losing credibility.
Uh-huh.
Philosophers are seen as just playing with words.
Right.
Theology weakened by secularization and problems in the church.
Yeah.
And the humanities are forced to serve economic needs.
Instead of exploring the big questions.
Right. And this creates space for all sorts of, like, gurus and self-help experts
Step in.
offering alternative meanings.
The meaning makers.
And here's the irony. Eagleton argues that modern life might have too many meanings,
Too many choices.
as well as too few that actually feel convincing.
Right, because there's so much disagreement about, basic moral and political questions.
Yeah.
Any single answer to life's meaning just seems doubtful.
Right.
There's so many other options out there.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Right.
We feel a crisis, we ask the question.
Yeah.
But the sheer number of answers makes it hard to believe any of them.
It's overwhelming.
And some people, especially those with liberal or postmodern views, they find meaning in this diversity of perspectives.
So the freedom to interpret.
Becomes the important thing.
The journey is the destination.
Right. And liberals, they often prefer open questions
Right.
to what they see as limiting answers.
Padma.
But Eagleton brings up a really crucial point.
What's that?
Not all ideas about the meaning of life are compatible.
Right.
Some actually contradict each other.
Oh, absolutely. Like valuing compassion versus...
Promoting cruelty.
Yeah.
So even people who believe in individual freedom.
Have to draw a line somewhere.
Right. And if there's such a thing as a shared meaning of life,
Right.
it can't be totally subjective.
I can't just change from person to person.
Right. So this leads to, like, a lot of skepticism toward the phrase, the meaning of life.
Among educated people, especially.
Yeah. Like, life is just this random outcome of evolution.
With no inherent purpose.
So you're free to make your own meaning.
The existentialist view.
But even the words meaning and life, they're slippery.
They are.
For religious people, meaning isn't a what, it's a who.
Right.
And meaning can refer to so many different things, like a definition,
Right.
an intention,
Purpose.
a pattern.
So many layers.
And when someone says, my life is meaningless,
Yeah.
they usually mean it lacks purpose.
It feels empty.
Not that it's, like, impossible to understand.
Right.
And I always think about Macbeth's speech in Shakespeare,
Oh, yeah.
when he talks about life being a tale told by an idiot, signifying nothing.
Powerful stuff.
He's not saying life is unintelligible.
Right?
He's saying it feels pointless.
Like it doesn't matter.
Right. So even saying that,
Relies on some idea of what meaning is.
yeah, exactly. You can't say something's absurd unless you have a sense of what makes sense.
Right.
So Eagleton explores meaning as intention.
Okay.
Could life be, like, God's message?
God's intention.
Something he wants us to understand.
Interesting.
But then you have people who don't believe in God,
Like Marxists.
who see meaning in the patterns of history
Progress unfolding.
without a divine plan.
Right. So meaning as a pattern.
Doesn't need an author.
No grand designer.
And even the universe itself,
Uh-huh.
with its laws and symmetries.
It's beautiful.
There's beauty there, even without a conscious designer.
Right. It's not either.
Right. It's not all meaning from God or total randomness,
Yeah.
and even people who believe in God.
I don't necessarily think non-believers are in total chaos.
Right. Some even see God as making the world more mysterious.
More open to interpretation.
Right. Like, he's not spelling everything out for us.
Leaving space for us to figure things out.
And Eagleton suggests that fundamentalism
Okay.
comes from this deep fear
Fear. Oh.
that if there isn't one absolute meaning,
Then there's no meaning at all.
right, it's the flip side of nihilism.
The house of cards.
Pull out one card.
And everything collapses.
But many religious people don't have that, like, fragile view.
They see things differently.
And then we get to Schopenhauer,
Oh, boy.
Mr. Pessimism,
Right. He had this idea that reality is driven by this blind force.
the will
The will.
that just wants to reproduce itself.
Yeah.
And we're just tools in this pointless process.
Rockets.
And consciousness, the thing that makes us think about meaning,
is actually a trick.
it's self-deception,
hiding the truth from us.
that life is ultimately futile.
Meaningless.
And this leads to a scary thought.
What if it's better not to know the real meaning of life?
What if the truth is just too much?
Yeah, like what if the real, as Lacan said,
Means losing ourselves.
losing our identity?
And this makes me think of Arthur Miller's characters,
Oh,
who
yeah.
cling to these false versions of themselves and the world.
Because the truth is too painful.
Yeah.
They'd rather live in a lie.
So Schopenhauer, he sees human existence as a mistake,
A cosmic error.
a pointless cycle of suffering and fleeting pleasure.
Ah,
But as Eagleton points out,
yeah.
even saying life is meaningless requires
A framework of meaning.
to make that judgment.
Exactly.
This obsession with meaninglessness often comes from remembering a time when meaning seemed to be present.
A sense of loss.
Nostalgia for a lost paradise.
And postmodernism sees this like angst against a meaningless world
As part of the problem.
as stemming from these unrealistic expectations.
Like, why should the world have inherent meaning?
Right. If you never expected it.
You wouldn't be disappointed.
Exactly.
And Beckett,
Oh, Becky.
he captures this ambiguity so well.
Waiting for Godot.
Right. The world is either completely elusive
Or brutally real.
and waiting. Is it an event or the absence of an event?
A good question.
Living becomes this putting off of any final meaning.
Delaying the inevitable.
But there's also the sense in Beckett that things just are
Inert.
inert, resistant to our attempts to give them meaning.
The body becomes just another machine.
Right. Clumsy and
Pointless.
pointless. And this brings up a question. What if meaningful and meaningless don't even apply to life?
What if those categories
Don't fit.
but don't fit?
If meaning is something we do,
And the world isn't inherently one or the other.
we don't get upset that we weren't born wearing a hat.
Right. It's just a fact.
So maybe we shouldn't worry so much about the world having some built-in meaning.
We're imposing our own expectations.
And this desire for a solid foundation of meaning,
Uh-huh.
it drives the whole search.
We want certainty.
But most of what we call inherent meaning is just how we understand things through language.
Our interpretation.
And sometimes, like with the mystery of the Mary Celeste,
We just don't know.
we don't know what happened.
The truth is elusive.
Maybe life has a meaning that's beyond our understanding.
Like Freud's idea that the meaning of life is death.
A return to nothingness.
Interesting.
And this brings up a debate in literature.
Oh, yeah.
Is the meaning of a poem inherent in the poem?
Or does the reader bring it?
Right. Nietzsche said we only find in things what we put there.
But what if meaning is something we encounter?
Something that pushes back against our interpretations.
That challenges us.
Eagleton argues that inherent and ascribed meaning aren't so separate.
They blur together.
He says even things like destiny or Christian salvation.
They involve human participation.
Right. We're not just passive recipients.
They're co-creators.
And Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida, it explores this.
Okay.
Through Troilus, who thinks value is something we invest.
And Hector, who believes in inherent value.
Right. It mirrors this question of whether meaning is innate or created.
A debate that's been going on for centuries.
And it goes back to theological differences.
Oh, yeah.
Catholics often emphasizing inherent meanings,
While Protestants stressed God's absolute power.
meaning the world itself has no inherent meaning.
It all depends on God's will.
It's almost like an early form of anti-essentialism.
And postmodernism basically replaces God with humans.
We become the creators of meaning.
The authors of our own reality.
But getting rid of all inherent meaning,
It can be risky.
it can undermine our sense of self.
Our agency.
Our free will
Freedom in a void
can lead to this empty meaninglessness,
where humanity seems absurd.
but it can also be liberating,
Right.
freeing us from one single interpretation.
Opening up possibilities.
And this Protestant pastor, Schleiermacher,
Schleiermacher.
he developed hermeneutics.
The theory of interpretation.
And you can even read Genesis as suggesting that humans create meaning through naming things.
We give the world its meaning.
But Eagleton reminds us that we're not unlimited in this.
We're not gods.
We're shaped by nature,
And by others.
by other people. We're surrounded by the meanings they've created.
Which form the basis for our own understanding.
So this idea that we can totally determine our own meaning,
It's partly an illusion.
and any meaningful life has to take into account basic human experiences.
Like
Family,
community,
our physical nature.
death.
These are experienced differently across cultures.
But they're fundamental to being human.
Even our way of thinking is connected to being physical beings.
Embodied minds.
Right. So the meaning of life has to include our bodies.
And our shared humanity.
And this brings us back to whether life is one thing with one meaning.
Right.
Wittgenstein warned about being bewitched by grammar.
Powerful phrase.
Is it a delusion to think everything adds up to one grand purpose?
Like a cosmic puzzle.
Even individual lives don't always feel unified.
They're messy and contradictory.
When we say the meaning of life, what do we even mean?
What are we really asking?
Are we asking, what's it all about?
What's the point?
And despite all our differences,
There are some common threads.
especially in our globalized world,
Yeah.
the pursuit of happiness seems pretty universal.
A good starting point.
And Aristotle saw happiness not just as a feeling,
But as a way of living well,
connected to virtue.
living a good life in a community.
But happiness can mean different things.
It can. Is it just a feeling?
Or is it this deeper well-being?
Coming from a certain way of life.
And then there's the happiness machine thought experiment,
Oh yeah, Nozick.
where you could plug in and experience constant pleasure.
But most people wouldn't choose that.
Right. It suggests happiness isn't just about feeling good.
It's about living authentically.
Aristotle saw well-being as something you do
An activity,
in a social context.
fulfilling your potential,
And Marx built on this, calling it self-realization.
including culture and sensory experiences.
Maybe self-fulfillment is a better word.
Less about achievements and more about living a complete life.
And while we usually know if we feel happy,
There's also false consciousness.
thinking we're happy when we're actually being misled
Aristotle tried to correct those misunderstandings.
about what true happiness is.
Yeah,
But happiness is also affected by our circumstances,
absolutely. Our material conditions,
the political systems we live under.
our free
Aristotle said you need a certain amount of freedom to live virtuously.
and a supportive environment.
So ethics and politics are connected.
Deeply connected.
But happiness might not be the whole story of meaning.
What else is there?
Someone could be happy doing terrible things.
Right?
A life could be orderly and goal-oriented.
But morally empty.
So formally meaningful.
But lacking substance.
And people find meaning in other things too. Power, love, honor, truth,
Big concepts.
and relationships.
Of
For many people, that's where they find the deepest meaning.
connection with others.
In our awareness of death plays a weird role.
It does.
It can make us detach from things,
See things more clearly.
but also appreciate life more intensely.
The preciousness of time.
Accepting our mortality is realistic.
Instead of trying to outrun death
And the idea of dying every moment
by putting others first.
can lead to a sense of connection and love,
Selflessness.
and even our desires
Freud talked about this.
can be seen as reflecting our eventual death.
Life as a kind of anticipation of its own end.
That's heavy.
It is.
For some thinkers, reflecting on truth is the highest goal.
The life of the mind.
But saying the meaning of life is to think about the meaning of life,
Seems circular.
like it's chasing its own tail,
It assumes meaning is a proposition.
something you can state.
But Wittgenstein saw things differently.
He did. He said the real problems of life aren't solved with answers.
They dissolve when we see the problem in a new way.
The meaning of life isn't a philosophical puzzle to be solved.
It's beyond that.
We glimpse it by realizing it's not a philosophical answer we're after. So if life has meaning,
It's not something you figure out in your head.
it's how you live,
Your choices.
the quality of your experiences,
The relationship.
the meaning of life